Hey everybody, welcome to the Think and Grow Society Friday night hangout. And I see some new faces in here. This is exciting. I want to welcome Janine Fennell and Karonda Fleming. Karonda had we had the privilege of having Karonda join us this past weekend, or this past week, in our production studios, our TV studio. She was recording for a project. And I see Arnell. I don't know who Arnell is, but welcome to the Think and Grow Society webinar. And Karan, it's good to see you. Rochelle, good to see you. And I think that pretty much is everybody so far. I wonder where Jack Gates is. That's unusual for him not to be in here. He must have gotten a tremendous offer from someplace else to be wherever he is. Maybe he'll dial in here later in a minute or two. But I know that as we're getting started here, there's a little bit of a tape delay, so to speak, so feel free to chat in the chat room as we go along, and I'll be checking the chat room from time to time. When you see me look over here, I'm not like doing something else. I'm following what's going on in the chat room, and obviously there's a little bit of a delay between the chat room and between my transmission and what's getting picked up in the chat room. I want to welcome Renee Canali. Thank you for joining us. And Karonda says, glad to be here. I'm glad that you are here. All right, well, listen, we're going to dive right in. We are on lesson, what is this, lesson 15? No, lesson 14. And tonight's lesson is on failure. And if you remember, there's 16 lessons in the Law of Success and 16 lessons. And then we're going to be talking about the science of getting rich and also Charles Haanel's The Master Key System. But tonight, it's all about the topic of failure. And I love this topic because for the longest time, I had the wrong relationship with failure. And I want you to think about what that really means. A lot of times we have a perception about things that causes something in our minds to be negative. And failure is probably one of the most important things that we consider to be a negative, mostly because we've been conditioned by society to believe that failure is negative. But as Dr. Hill described in this particular lesson, there's a distinction between failure and temporary defeat. Even temporary defeat, in my mind, is too harsh a term to use for something that doesn't go the way you anticipated it. I think a better way, for me at least, to describe this is what John Maxwell recently came out with a book called Sometimes You Win, Sometimes You Learn. And that, for me, is what really failure means, or what failure is really about, is trying things, experiencing the trying, and seeing what comes out of it. And so I like to think that many times we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes, but we are resistant to going out and failing. John Maxwell also has another book called Failing Forward, where he talks about the lessons that come out of some of these so-called failures. So tonight I'd like to talk with you about hopefully changing your relationship with failure. Now, most of you probably didn't realize you have a relationship with failure. You don't even know what I'm talking about, but there is somewhat of a relationship going on between you and failure. If you think about it, in school, we were graded on a scale from A to F, with A being, the pinnacle of what you could achieve and F being failure. But the only way to find out whether you were going to get an A or an F was to go out and try something. And a lot of times we have a tendency to be resistant to trying things for fear of failure. Remember back in the early lessons, one of the lessons was on the fears, and fear of failure was one of those fears. And so when you think about it, we have a fear of failure which stifles us in our willingness to go out and try things. But trying things is how we learn. Remember, we talked about, you may remember in the very beginning of the lessons, we talked about the 4 ways that we learn. Who remembers the 4 ways that we learn? This will be an interesting quiz. Why don't we do a little quiz here? I don't know who Z is, but welcome Z, and welcome Mark. Mark Stecker, I'm sure that is. Um, oh, we just lost some people here. What happened here? We got some consolidation all of a sudden here. Anyway, doesn't matter. Welcome to the. Oh, we got some more people popping in. That's unusual. Anyway, let's take a look in the chat room and see if anybody remembers what the 4 ways that oh, I see. Janine had 2 windows open. Ah, so she had 2 windows open. She was hearing me twice. Twice is nice. All right, so does anybody remember the 4 ways that we learn? And if you don't, please tell me in the chat room so that I don't sit here waiting for someone to come up with them. But again, fear of failure is one of those big moments in time for us, because it usually means that we're not willing to go out and try something because we don't want to be labeled a failure if it doesn't work out. Now, why is it that we always focus on what happens if it doesn't work rather than how great it'll be if it does? You know, the upside potential, that's how powerful the fear of failure is that the upside potential of winning or achieving or being successful outweighs the potential for embarrassment or feeling inadequate or feeling worthless because it didn't work out. Can you imagine what life would be like if Thomas Edison had been fearful of failure at the level that most of us are? I mean, I think it's been told or been said that he took 9,999 times before he stumbled or before he discovered the way that the light bulb would work. And his attitude towards those temporary defeats was not that they were failures, but that he had simply been successful in discovering 9,999 ways that the light bulb would not work. And the reason that's important is because he knew that each temporary defeat brought him closer to finding the way that would work. Now, I've got personal, anecdotal experience with that very scenario. The good news for you is I'm not going to talk about it tonight. But I can tell you that I have been through a lot of temporary defeats leading up to the launch of the Village Connector media project and Consumers Win Savings Club and all the things that I've had over the years percolating under the surface. And most of those temporary defeats were a function of my needing to be clearer about what my objectives were and be clearer about what I was trying to accomplish and be clear in my mind about what I wanted the outcome to be. And more important than anything else, I needed to learn more. So what I want you to do, I want you to write this down. This is really important. Renee, no, thanks for responding on the 4 ways we learn, but that's not what I was looking for. Let me lay these out for you because this is important. There are 4 basic ways that we learn. Oh, is my sound working with this little headset? I was supposed to plug in the other one. That's weird. Anyway, doesn't matter. There are 4 ways that we learn. And those 4 ways are through learned knowledge, meaning lecture, reading books, taking notes and all that kind of stuff. That's what we call learned knowledge. Learned knowledge being that we are actually making a formal effort to assimilate or acquire knowledge, usually through a more formal method like that, like being in a classroom setting. Okay, so that's the first way that we learn. The second way we learn is through activity knowledge. That's where you take what you've learned in the classroom and you go out and you actually try it and do it. Now, sometimes we don't. Well, not everything that we learn comes directly from learned knowledge, so to speak. It comes from a variety of different directions. You didn't go into a classroom or read a book to learn how to ride a bicycle. You got on the bicycle and you got pushed down the street, and if you didn't figure it out fast enough, you ended up on the street. That's activity knowledge. So we've got learned knowledge and activity knowledge. The third way that we learn, and I'm going to circle back to activity knowledge in a minute. The third way that we learn is through modeling knowledge. That's where hopefully we're being attentive enough to look at what somebody else is doing that we'd like to be able to do. And we follow their lead. So we see that in history where people have been in an apprenticeship under the study of somebody else doing what it is that they wanted to do. They're learning by watching and observing someone else's model. If someone's working on being successful at something, then they're following that model so that they're shortening their learning curve by avoiding the things that don't work and focusing on what did. That's 3 ways that we learn. The 4th way, of course, is teaching knowledge. And I say that as if you should like automatically know that, but I guess if you were in one of the previous lessons, you would. So teaching knowledge is the 4th way. So we got learned knowledge, activity knowledge, modeling knowledge, and teaching knowledge. Now, I want to circle back to activity knowledge. Now think about this. Activity, the act of doing the things that you're seeking to learn, results sometimes in temporary defeat. Because sometimes it takes you time to get good enough at something before you have learned to master it or learned to acquire the skill. Now, if you fear failure, then by definition, you've just removed one of the most important ways that we learn from your repertoire. You're now in a position where you've handicapped your ability to be productive because you've got one way that you could be learning that you're shying away from because you're afraid of what people will think if you don't succeed. So that's why it's important for you to consider changing your attitude towards failure. See, failure is a learning tool. It's an opportunity to learn. When you fail, it's not important that you failed. It's important what you learned in the process of reaching failure or temporary defeat. So I want you to write this down. This is probably one of the most important lessons that I've learned, and therefore one of the most important lessons that I teach. I want you to write this down in big block letters. Fear equals time to learn. Fear equals time to learn. So if you've got a fear of failure, then you are doubly in need of learning. Because you first have to overcome the concept of being fearful, and then you have to overcome the concept of being fearful of failing. But here's why that's important. If you can condition yourself to view fear as time to learn and failure to look towards what you did learn from it, now every time you find yourself being fearful, you can have a positive attitude about it because it means you're about to learn something. And learning something new can never be a bad thing. Especially if it helps to propel you in the direction of something you're seeking to accomplish. And failure, by the same token, can never be a bad thing if you learn from it and it better prepares you for the next attempt. I don't know how many times we tried to launch a rocket ship into space, but can you imagine if we had failed the first time and then everyone said, let's go home, that's too dangerous, or we'll never be able to do that? That won't happen. Yeah, that would have been kind of crazy. But it was the fact that we kept persistent. We were diligent. We kept at it. We didn't give up. That we now go in and out of space like it was going up and down the highway. Same thing with the light bulb. We produce light bulbs like it was nothing. But in the beginning, it took everything Thomas Edison had to create the light bulb. So in the beginning, you obviously should expect that it's going to take a little more effort for you to master what it takes to accomplish certain tasks, whatever those tasks may be. Now, again, your attitude, your relationship with failure will dictate the outcome for you. Nobody's excited about not having something work the first time, but they shouldn't be disappointed either. They should simply be able to look at what happened there and see what they can do to make a better attempt next time. You know, Dr. Hill, I mean, there's nobody on this planet that's perfect at all that they do. There's no one on this planet that's perfect at anything they do, for that matter. So why do we expect to be perfect? Why do we expect that we're not going to have temporary defeats from time to time? That's not a realistic goal to have. So the next time you feel yourself restricted in your willingness to try something, for fear that it might not work. You really need to stop and think about the fact that you are stifling your own opportunity to grow, to learn, and to assimilate new information. Why would you do that to yourself? If you're serious about achieving your goal, you've got to be willing to throw your hat into the ring, get out of the stands, get on the field, and get yourself dirty. And that's what failure is all about, is getting yourself dirty, getting in the game. I don't care how much the fans root for you, none of them ever cross the finish line with the ball in their hand. So the bottom line is, it's up to the people on the field to get dirty. And that really is what it's all about when it comes to failure. You're going to get dirty. Now, here's the reality. Here's how you should look at failure, though. In everything you should do your best to come up with a plan for how you're going to attain a particular objective, whatever that might be. And then you commit yourself to implement that plan through activity. And then after you've implemented the plan through activity, you're going to take an assessment of how it's going. In other words, you're going to review your results. So plan, I want you to write this down. Plan, do, review. Plan, do, review. The better you become at planning, the more likely you are to spend less time with temporary defeats. You will experience temporary defeats, especially when you're trying to do something worth doing. That's exactly right, Mark. It's time to get dirty. That's exactly right. So what I'm saying to you is that if you come up with a plan, you want to make that the best plan that you're capable of that moment in time. You then want to make a commitment to engage in the activity that's necessary to implement the plan. And as you're implementing that plan, you want to pay attention to the results that you're getting. If the results are good, then you know that you're being successful. If the results aren't good, then you want to review those results and see what adjustments you might need to make to your plan. But the process continues. Plan, do, review. Plan, do, review. Now notice how do has to do with the second way we learn, activity. So in the process of engaging in the doing portion of this little three-step process, you're actually engaged in activity, and therefore you're engaged in activity knowledge, because you're either going to find that it works or you're going to find that it doesn't work. But if you find that it doesn't work, the process of going through what didn't work will also clue you in on where adjustments may need to be made to make it work next time. You know, I would be almost embarrassed if my attitude towards failure and temporary defeat was a poor one. I'd be almost embarrassed to tell you how long it's taken us to get to where we are today with Village Connector Media. I mean, we have reached temporary defeat so many times. You know, I feel like Thomas Edison inventing the light bulb. But I will tell you this, we didn't give up. And we're not going to give up. And in fact, this week, we're going to be making some major strides with Village Connector that are born out of the fact that we didn't give up. We kept refining the plan. We kept trying new things. We would assess what the results were, go back to the drawing board, add this, add that, move this over here. We would make changes based on the feedback that we got from the efforts, from the activity that we engaged in. That's what's necessary to success, folks. So it's not, you know, failure or temporary defeat is nothing to apologize for. If anything, you ought to be apologizing for letting temporary defeat become failure by quitting. Because that's the only difference between temporary defeat and failure, is that temporary defeat means it didn't work this time. Failure means that it didn't work this time and you quit because you gave up. So my message to you tonight is don't give up. Don't let temporary defeat be a deal breaker. Let temporary defeat be a learning opportunity, a learning experience. You see, we don't make mistakes. We create learning experiences, assuming that we're learning from the experiences. Now, if you're not learning from the experiences, then you might as well quit, because you know it doesn't make sense to keep doing something over and over and then not having it be successful because you're not paying attention to where the lesson was in that thing. But I really believe that if you change your attitude uh, I think that if you change your attitude towards failure and towards the fear of failure and towards fear generally, to embrace the concept that fear equals time to learn. I have a little bit of fear. I got some butterflies in my stomach. It must be time for me to learn something, or I must be about to learn something. Or, wow, that didn't work. Let me get over being disappointed and take a look at what happened in this situation that caused it to be unsuccessful this time, and let me plan out a better way for next time. But always be focused on planning that better way. Nobody is a failure until they admit defeat and accept that